When Adise first arrived at the palace, she came with no possessions, no family, and not a single word upon her lips. Her eyes, however, spoke volumes, dark, deep, and unwavering. She had been found wandering near the forest's edge, barefoot and dust-covered, with a scar behind her left ear in the shape of a crescent moon. No one knew her origins. Some claimed she had escaped a burning village. Others whispered that she had been born of ash and shadow. But the queen, despite her advisor's warnings, had ordered that Adise be taken in. "She is only a child," the queen had said coldly. "She poses no threat." Yet from the moment Adise stepped through the palace gates, strange things began to happen. The air in the throne room grew thicker whenever she entered, as if it recognized her. The palace cats refused to go near her, hissing and arching their backs whenever she passed. The flames in the lanterns flickered wildly in her presence, sometimes bending toward her instead of upward. And once, a mirror in the eastern hall cracked from the center outward when she stared into it too long. No one could explain it. The queen pretended not to notice these oddities. But her fingers twitched every time Adise walked into a room, and her smiles grew tighter with each passing day. She placed the girl under the care of the palace maids, ordering that Adise be clothed, fed, and educated in silence. But no tutor could reach her. She sat through lessons like a stone, staring with those ever-watchful eyes, saying nothing, writing nothing. One tutor swore he saw flames dancing in her pupils when he tried to teach her history. He quit the next morning and refused to return. The queen tried to dismiss the girl's silence as trauma. "She is mute," she said, "or perhaps slow of mind. We will not abandon a child for being broken." But deep down she knew Adise was far from broken. The queen had once been young, once knew the weight of secrets, and she had learned long ago that silence could be a weapon. And Adise wielded it like a sword. One evening during a banquet, the nobles raised golden goblets in honor of the queen's decade on the throne. Laughter rang out, candles glowed high, and dancers spun like falling leaves. But when Adise stepped into the hall, everything halted. A breeze rose from nowhere, snuffing half the candles. The music stopped. Adise's eyes found the queen's, and for a moment, time stretched unnaturally thin, as if the entire palace held its breath. The queen stood quickly and gestured for her guards. "She mustn't be allowed in public celebrations. Take her back to her quarters." From that day on, Adise was confined to the West Wing. Guards were posted at her door. But no door could keep out what Adise brought with her. That night, one guard woke up screaming, claiming his bed had caught fire, though no scorch marks were found. Another guard quit without explanation, eyes hollow, lips trembling. The queen, disturbed but desperate to appear in control, declared them all superstitious fools. Still she couldn't sleep. Every dream she had now featured the same thing: a girl with fire crawling up her skin like vines, walking through the palace as the walls melted around her. Always silent. Always staring. The queen began to visit Adise's wing herself, under the guise of offering care. She would bring fruit, new dresses, even jewelry, attempting to read the girl's expressions. But Adise never took anything. She would simply sit by the window watching the sky, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden sill, spirals, flames, moons. One day the queen noticed something carved faintly into the sill. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. Adise looked at her, tilted her head, and held up 3 fingers. 3. The queen left without another word. That night, she ordered her sorcerer to analyze the carvings. He returned pale and trembling. "The symbols," he whispered, "are ancient fire runes. Forbidden ones. The girl has marked a countdown." "A countdown to what?" The sorcerer shook his head. "That? I do not know." Panic bloomed in the queen's chest, but she could not show weakness. Instead, she sent secret orders to have Adise taken into the forest and left there to die. It was a cruel decision, but the queen had made cruel decisions before. She had ruled with a velvet hand and an iron heart. She had burned villages, exiled priests, and silenced prophets. One silent girl would not undo her reign. But the guard she sent never returned. A week passed. Then 2. On the 3rd week, Adise walked calmly back into the palace unscathed. Her dress was clean. Her hair perfectly tied. And in her hand she carried a single feather, scorched at the tip. She said nothing. The queen nearly collapsed. She called her sorcerer, her generals, her wisest advisors. No one could explain it. They begged her to confess. What did she know about the girl? Where had she come from? Had the queen wronged someone, angered the spirits, broken a vow? But the queen told no one the truth. No one knew that years ago, desperate for power, she had made a pact with a fire deity, a spirit of smoke and ash, that had granted her the throne. The price had been steep, her firstborn child. But her child had died in the womb, or so she believed. Still, from that day forward, the fire inside the palace had always obeyed her. Until Adis. Now the fire flickered unpredictably. It whispered. It danced to a new rhythm. One night, while pacing her chamber, the queen lit a candle and watched its flame. It leaned toward her, then away. Then, for a brief second, it formed a shape, a girl with a crescent moon scar behind her ear. The queen dropped the candle. She could no longer ignore what was rising. The past was returning, not as rumor, not as legend, but in the flesh. And it was silent. And it was watching. Adis said nothing. She simply waited. And the queen, once the most feared woman in the land, began to fear the silence more than anything else. The queen sat in her rosewood chamber, staring into the mirror not to admire her reflection, but to study the creeping lines beside her eyes. Every day she tried to push back time with herbal oils, hidden spells, and offerings to silent spirits, yet it came for her regardless. And lately the court had begun whispering of someone else. Not a noble, not a warrior, but a girl. A girl who didn't speak, didn't argue, and yet drew attention like fire draws moths. Adis. She had come months ago, escorted by monks who claimed they found her on the edge of the forest. A child of fire, quiet and lost, found near a burnt village no one remembered building. The queen, perhaps in a moment of impulsive mercy or secret fear, had agreed to raise the girl in the palace. She assumed she would wither under the court's cold rituals. But Adis thrived, not loudly, not brightly, but with the weight of something ancient. The queen's spies returned one evening with whispers more dangerous than swords. One said the girl had been born under a red moon. Another claimed that when Adis stood near the braziers in the eastern wing, the flames would flicker oddly, as if dancing in silent recognition. And then there was the tale brought by the midwife who had helped care for her, the strange birthmark shaped like a curling flame at the base of her spine. It was an old prophecy, thought buried with the last fire seers. When the moon weeps red and the child is born in silence, fire shall bow and kings shall fall. The queen's hands trembled as she recalled the verse. She had spent a lifetime silencing threats to her rule, generals, priests, even her own sister. But Adis unnerved her in ways they hadn't. The girl did nothing to challenge her. She did not even speak. And yet her silence screamed through the halls. Servants began telling stories in hushed voices. One claimed Adis once touched a cracked pot and it sealed itself. Another swore the dying tree by the palace gates bloomed after she sat beneath it. But more frightening were the stories from the children, that they heard music when she walked past, though no instrument played. The queen summoned her most trusted advisor, Uzoma, a man versed in forbidden scripts and sacred truths. She brought him to her private chamber and laid bare her fear. "Tell me this is just coincidence," she demanded. Uzoma did not answer immediately. He lit incense and whispered a spell to keep the walls deaf. Then he unfolded a scroll, brittle, smudged with ash but readable. "There was once a line of queens," he began, "who could command the fire. They were marked not by crowns but by silence and scars. One would return, it is said, not with rage but with stillness. And from her stillness, kingdoms would fall." The queen laughed, but it was hollow. "You speak of bedtime stories. Then you have not watched her closely," Uzoma said. "I have. She does not walk, she glides. The air bends near her. Animals pause around her. The girl does not speak, not because she cannot, but because she chooses not to. And the red moon watched her birth." The queen dismissed him, but his words lingered like smoke. That night, she visited Adis' room under the guise of a kind guardian. She brought honeyed bread and a soft shawl. The girl, sitting cross-legged on the floor, looked up and nodded politely. Her eyes, the color of burned mahogany, never blinked. "You do not miss your home?" the queen asked. Adis gave a slow shake of her head. "You never speak?" Pause. Then she placed a single finger to her lips. The queen shivered. In the weeks that followed, the queen doubled her efforts. She sent false priests to question the girl, hoping she would falter. None returned with answers. She tried to place her in cold tasks, scrubbing floors, feeding animals, but the servants began requesting to work alongside her. They claimed she made the work lighter, even joyous. The queen arranged for her to be moved far from the palace center, to the towers where no warmth reached. Yet the torches burned brighter when Adis passed. Eventually the queen could bear no more. She called a secret meeting of her inner circle, masked in the night and veiled by storm. There she revealed her decision. "The girl is dangerous," she said. "She must be tested. A priest suggested fire. If she is truly linked to flame, let her be surrounded by it. Either it consumes her or it bends. The queen agreed. A test, veiled as a festival ritual, was declared. A flame dance, long forbidden, would be held again in honor of an old god. 100 torches would be lit. Each maiden of the palace would carry a flame from one torch to the other, stepping barefoot across a path of embers. A symbol of purity and devotion. But the embers, only for Adis, would be soaked in hidden oils. Meant to bite. To scar. The night of the ritual, the sky darkened early. Clouds covered the stars and even the moon turned pale. One by one the maidens danced and crossed the embers. Whispers fluttered with each step. When would it be her turn? When Adis emerged, cloaked in simple cloth, silence blanketed the courtyard. She said nothing. She simply walked. Her bare feet met the glowing coals. But no scream followed. No scent of burning flesh. Only the crackling of fire. And something else. A humming sound. Low and deep. The embers glowed blue, then gold, then white. As she walked, the flames parted. Not a single coal dared touch her skin. Her cloak fluttered, though no wind blew. And behind her the coals turned to ash, soft, gray, cold ash. The crowd gasped. The queen's hands tightened around the arms of her throne. When Adis reached the end she turned. And for the first time she opened her mouth. One word escaped, just one. I remember. No one knew what she meant. But the queen did. She remembered everything. The orphan lie. The fire that had consumed her family. The red moon. The queen years ago had burned a village near the border to hide her crimes. To stop an old seer from naming the next flame-bearer. That night a child survived. A child who had not cried. A child the spirits had marked. A child born under fire. And now that child stood before her. Untouched by flame. Later that night in the queen's chambers the fireplace went out on its own. And from the ashes on the floor, a symbol rose, glowing faintly. It was the mark of the old queen's. The queen tried to sweep it away, but it clung to her skin. That night she dreamed of a throne swallowed in fire. And the one who sat upon it, silent, steady, watching, was Adis. The flame had returned. And it would not burn quietly this time. The palace had long whispered of the sealed chamber, a wing closed off before most servants had even been born. Some said it was cursed, others said it held the bones of traitors, while a few murmured that even the queen feared what was buried within. Adis, though silent as always, often found herself drawn toward the eastern corridor where the thick iron doors stood like sentinels. She was careful never to linger too long, always cautious, always watching. But the whispers of fire in her blood and the dreams that stirred her awake at night had become louder with each passing day. That morning she wandered again. It was a quiet hour, the sun still soft in the sky, and the palace heavy with sleep. She slipped past guards, her bare feet soundless on the polished stone. As she reached the forbidden corridor, a strange warmth crept up her arms. Her fingertips tingled. She paused in front of the chamber. The door had no keyhole, no visible latch, just a seam barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. She lifted her hand. The warmth grew stronger, the air around her thickened, and just as her palm touched the door, a shiver ran through the floor beneath her. Adis. The voice cracked through the air like lightning. The queen. She stood at the far end of the corridor, eyes like sharpened daggers, hair wrapped in gold silk, her fingers curled around a staff that pulsed faintly with crimson light. The guards followed behind her, faces tight, uncertain. Adis lowered her hands slowly and turned. You've grown bold, the queen said, voice cold, cloaked in velvet malice. Curious little flame. Adis said nothing. She simply stared, her eyes calm but unflinching. A moment passed and the queen stepped forward, her robes trailing behind like smoke. Do you know what lies behind that door? Adis blinked once. Of course not, the queen sneered. You're just a quiet little orphan who knows nothing of boundaries. She raised her hand. Guards, take her to the cellar. She needs reflection. The guards hesitated. Adis never resisted, never spoke, never posed any danger. Yet something in the queen's voice, tight with fear beneath the cruelty, pushed them to obey. They seized her arms. As she was dragged away, Adis looked back at the chamber door. For the briefest second, it shimmered. Like heat rising from stone. That night, the sky refused to darken fully. Clouds swirled strangely. Winds carried the scent of soot. In the palace, the queen sat alone in her study, a goblet of dark wine trembling in her hand. She had banished many before. She had silenced many who grew too curious, too close. But Adiz, she had been different. Too silent. Too aware. The queen had seen her watching the flame dancers during last year's festival, her eyes reflecting fire as if it lived in her. And now she dared to approach the forbidden wing. It had been centuries since anyone had dared. The queen drank and waited. Then came the scream. It ripped through the night like a blade. Then another. Then the bells began to ring. Flames. Flames in the eastern wing. Guards stormed the corridor. The sealed chamber was ablaze, not just the door but the stone walls around it, the ceiling, the floor. But the strangest thing, there was no source. No torch. No candle. And the fire moved strangely, in spirals and shapes like glyphs. As if writing something the walls had long forgotten. The queen stood on the staircase, staring in disbelief as heat pulsed through the air. Her staff vibrated in her hand. She barked orders. Seal the wing. Fetch the high priest. Do not let it reach the throne room. But it was too late. Fire danced across tapestries, through hallways, yet left no burn marks behind. Instead, it painted symbols in the air, ancient, forgotten. The priest arrived breathless, sweat pouring from his brow, but stopped short when he saw the sigils blazing on the walls. He dropped to his knees. They are back, he whispered. Who? The queen hissed. The flame-bound. The spirits your ancestors imprisoned. The queen turned to him, face pale. Impossible. That chamber was sealed with blood. Yes, the priest said softly. And blood has returned to awaken it. Meanwhile, in the cellar, Adiz sat in darkness. But she wasn't afraid. Her arms glowed faintly, the markings she'd hidden all her life now shimmering like coals under skin. She closed her eyes and felt the palace breathe, yes, breathe, like a sleeping beast waking up. Her pulse echoed with its heartbeat. She stood and without touching the door, it swung open. No guard was posted. Everyone was fleeing or fighting the flames. Adiz walked calmly through the halls. Fire passed her but did not burn. Smoke circled but did not choke. She moved toward the forbidden wing. The queen saw her then, just a silhouette through the smoke. You. She breathed. What are you? Adiz stopped just beyond the fire's edge. She looked at the queen for a long time. Then she spoke. One word. Return. It was the first word she had spoken in years. And it cracked the floor beneath them. The chamber door, what remained of it, exploded outward. A gust of ash swept through the palace, covering everything in gray. In its heart stood not flames but figures, tall, shimmering, robed in heat and memory. The flame-bound. The queen fell to her knees, staff clattering. Adiz walked into the chamber, unharmed. The figures bowed to her. We knew you'd return, one said, voice like embers. The blood of our keeper flows in you. Adiz turned, eyes aglow. The queen broke the pact. The figures nodded. And now, another spirit murmured, a new pact must be written. Outside, the palace servants gathered in silence. Fire had illuminated markings across the palace walls, writings long erased, prophecies, names, bloodlines. Adiz's name blazed among them. The queen, trembling, whispered, You were always meant to burn me, weren't you? Adiz looked down at her. Not to burn. To cleanse. And with a wave of her hand, the flames receded. The smoke dissolved. The symbols faded, but not from memory. That night, the eastern wing remained open. The chamber no longer burned. But it whispered. Adiz vanished once again. But now, every mirror in the palace showed her reflection. And in the throne room, on the very spot the queen once stood, a ring of ash refused to be swept away. Night fell with an unnatural stillness across the palace. Not even the wind dared to whistle through the windows, as if the air itself held its breath. In the lowest part of the dungeon, deep beneath the celebration halls, Queen Morawa descended the stone steps with only a single torch in hand. The flames cast long shadows on the walls, flickering like spirits trying to escape the dark. Adiz sat chained to the cold wall, her eyes half closed, lips dry, body bruised but upright. Her silence hadn't broken, not even when the guards had dragged her down, not even when they'd chained her in iron meant for traitors and demons. The queen had expected fear. Perhaps begging. But the girl offered neither. Just that same unsettling calm that made even the guards reluctant to look her in the eyes. You think your silence protects you? The queen hissed, approaching her. Adiz lifted her head slightly. Her eyes glimmered, not with defiance but something else. Something unreadable. The queen felt it again, that creeping sense that this girl, this orphan, was not ordinary. Born under a red moon, surrounded by whispers of fire and change, Adiz had always been more than she seemed. The queen had sensed it the first day she laid eyes on her, standing quietly at the palace gates, dusty and barefoot. That presence, soft yet immovable. It unnerved her then. It terrified her now. "You should have stayed in the shadows," the queen muttered. "But you wandered where you shouldn't. You touched what should remain sealed." From her cloak, the queen pulled a small flask of crimson liquid. Its contents shimmered unnaturally, glowing from within like embers. Flame blood. The ancient, forbidden essence said to link the mortal to the fire spirits. Few dared seek it. Fewer still survived its use. But Queen Morowa had dealt with flame before. She had bargained once many years ago, to rise above her rivals. And now she returned to it one final time, to silence the girl whose very breath threatened everything she had built. Chalk markings already lined the dungeon floor, symbols etched in old tongue, mixed with salt and blood. The guards had long gone. No one else knew. Only the queen. And Adise. "You carry prophecy like disease," the queen spat, circling the girl. "But I will be the cure." She poured the flame blood onto the markings. The dungeon floor shimmered, then pulsed. The torchlight dimmed as the symbols began to glow red and gold, like veins beneath the stone. Adise stirred. A soft sound escaped her lips, something like a breath or maybe a warning. "You feel it, don't you?" the queen whispered, kneeling beside her. "The old one's stirring. But they will obey me. They always have." The queen chanted in a language lost to most tongues. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied, fueled by desperation and fear. The symbols burned brighter. Heat flooded the dungeon, the walls beginning to sweat, iron chains groaning as they expanded. Then came the fire. It erupted from the floor, silent at first like liquid light. It climbed the walls, curled around the stones and circled Adise without touching her. The queen's eyes widened. She had expected screams. She had prepared herself to watch the girl writhe and burn and be gone. But Adise sat still. The fire coiled closer. It reached her skin, touched her arms, her hair, her breath. And yet, no scream came. Only the queen screamed. Because the moment the flame touched Adise's flesh, it changed. It turned white, then silver, then deep crimson. And it did not consume her, it wrapped around her like a cloak, melting the chains away. "No," the queen gasped, stumbling back. No, this isn't right." She backed against the wall as the fire began to shift. It was no longer wild. It had shape now. Form. It walked. It breathed. It listened. Adise stood. Her skin was marked with glowing lines, like molten cracks running down her arms and across her face. Her eyes burned with a light not of this world, her voice finally breaking the silence. "You burned me in secret," she said softly, "but fire remembers the truth." The queen raised the empty flask as if it could protect her. "Stay back. I command you. I am queen." Adise stepped forward. The fire followed her, not in chaos but like a tide obeying the moon. "Your crown is forged in stolen flame," Adise continued. "Your throne built on bones. The fire knows. It always knew." The queen stumbled again, her back hitting the sealed door. This is a trick. You're not real. You're just a child. A cursed orphan." Adise looked at her, and the fire pulsed once, fierce, furious, righteous. "I was born under a red moon," Adise said. "But not to burn. To burn away the lies." The dungeon shook. Cracks split the floor. The symbols turned to ash. The torch died in the queen's hand. And then the flames surged. There was no scream. Only silence as the fire swallowed the queen whole. Her form vanished in a storm of white light, leaving behind nothing but her crown, scorched black at the edges. Adise knelt and picked it up. The flames licked at her fingers but did not burn. She turned and walked back up the dungeon stairs, the fire following her like a loyal companion. Not one guard stood in her way. The air shifted with her ascent. The walls, long cold and cracked, shimmered with warmth. Tapestries long faded seemed to pulse with life. The palace, once silent and heavy with secrets, seemed to breathe again. By the time she reached the throne room, dawn was breaking outside. The festival fires had dimmed. Musicians slept. But inside, the throne room was filled with light, not from the windows but from the very floor. The ashes of Queen Morowa danced through the air like glowing snow, swirling and falling upon the throne. Adise stepped forward. With careful hands she placed the crown at the center of the ashes. Then she knelt. "I did not come to rule," she whispered to the room, "only to awaken what you buried." Behind her, the great banners of the palace caught flame, not in destruction but in transformation. They burned away to reveal older symbols. Forgotten emblems. The mark of the flame-bearer from long ago. And far above, from the high windows of the tower, the people of the city looked on. They saw the smoke rising not in plumes of war but in patterns of prophecy. They heard no screams. Only silence. But in that silence they knew everything had changed. The girl they had ignored, the orphan they had pitied, the one they thought too quiet to be dangerous, had burned away the queen herself. And she had done it not with rage, but with truth. And fire never forgets. At first the queen believed it was merely guilt. A trick of her weary mind, stirred by too many restless nights. The morning after Adiz was burned in secret, the queen awoke to a flickering in the corner of her room. Not fire but something colder, smoke curling from a mirror that hadn't been touched. She blinked, stepped closer. There was nothing there. Only her reflection, drawn and regal as ever. She convinced herself it was a candle's breath, a passing breeze. Yet, something in her chest had begun to stir, tight and unsettled. The servants were the first to whisper. In hushed tones behind thick stone walls, they spoke of odd happenings. Soot footprints along the polished floors where no one had walked, whispers that tickled their ears at dawn, a girl's sigh drifting through hallways thick with incense. At first no one dared say her name. But everyone thought it. Adiz. The queen doubled the palace guard. Lanterns were lit in every hall. Priests were summoned from distant temples to cleanse the air. Yet still, every night, the queen would wake choking on phantom smoke, her silken sheets warm as if fire had passed over them. And every morning, the ashes in the brazier near her bed seemed disturbed, shifted into faint patterns she didn't understand. One evening as she dined alone, she caught the scent again. Burned jasmine and bloodwood, the exact mixture she had used during the secret ritual deep in the dungeon's belly. Her goblet trembled in her hand. She called for the high priest. He arrived with sacred oil and sand from the fire isles, muttering prayers older than the kingdom. But as he stepped into the dining hall, he froze. There, scorched into the stone near the queen's throne, was a faint mark, a spiral of flame that hadn't been there before. He dropped to his knees. "This is no trick, your grace. The flame knows." She dismissed him furious. She ordered the floor scrubbed and the scent masked. But that night in her mirror she saw Adiz. Not the girl as she had last seen her, weak and sobbing in chains, but stronger. Her eyes glowing embers. Her mouth sealed shut, yet screaming in silence. The queen struck the mirror, shattering it, her breath ragged. But as shards fell to the ground, one piece remained upright, showing Adiz still staring, unmoved. The queen screamed until her voice cracked. Over the next days, birds began to fall from the sky. Not many, just a few, but each was scorched. Feathers blackened as if dipped in flame. The royal aviary keeper trembled when presenting the third to the queen. No predator touched them. It's as if the fire chose them. Torches began to die on their own. In the west wing, a massive golden chandelier melted at the center, sagging like wax. The metalsmiths found no explanation. "Fire leaves marks," they said. But this left purpose. One brave servant finally spoke, an elderly woman named Imbala. She had once cared for Adiz in her early days. She stood before the queen and said, the girl was not ordinary. The silence she wore was not weakness. It was waiting. Listening. She was marked. The queen dismissed her and had her imprisoned for spreading fear. But that night, Imbala vanished. Her cell was locked from the outside, untouched. The only trace left behind was a single black feather and a swirl of ash in the corner, shaped like a sleeping girl. Panic grew among the people. Children dreamed of fire trees. Soldiers reported seeing a veiled figure standing atop the palace roof during storms. Statues of old queens cracked at the base. And always, that scent returned. Not quite fire. Not quite life. Something between. The queen could not sleep. She paced her rooms until her feet bled. The high priest refused to return. The court magicians vanished into exile. Left alone, she began burning incense by the hour, chanting words she no longer believed. Her own reflection turned against her. Every mirror she passed showed her not her face but a blur, as if the air between worlds was bending. She went to the dungeon herself one night, desperate to prove to her own heart that Adiz was gone. The chains still lay where she had left them. The scorch marks were still etched into the stone floor. But the ashes were gone. Not scattered, gone. She touched the place where the girl had been reduced to dust. The stone was warm. She drew back her hand, frightened, then turned to leave, and heard the chains rattle. Just once. Enough. The queen sealed the dungeon with molten gold. She forbid anyone to speak of the girl again. Her advisors obeyed, but their eyes betrayed them, tired, restless, always watching shadows. And in those shadows, Adise began to form again. She appeared first in the dreams of the palace children. A girl with glowing fingers and eyes like flame. She said nothing, only watched. But every child woke whispering the same words, "She remembers." The queen's own son, a boy of 10, began to draw pictures in soot. Spirals, firebirds, a girl in chains. He did not understand their meaning. But when asked who told him, he said, "The girl from the walls." Paintings blackened. Curtains caught fire but never burned through. Smoke weaved between corridors like living things. The queen walked with guards even to her bath. She ordered every book about fire magic to be burned, and each morning they reappeared untouched on her pillow. Finally, in desperation, she called upon a seer. An ancient woman whose eyes were covered with gold leaf to block her vision from the cursed. The queen begged, pleaded for guidance. The seer did not speak for a long time. Then she said, "The ash you left behind has breath. The flame you tried to bury remembers its shape. You killed a prophecy, but prophecy burns back." "What must I do?" the queen cried. "Nothing," the seer said softly. "There is nothing left for you to do. She is no longer ashes." And indeed she wasn't. That very night, the wind howled through the halls like a furnace bellows. The queen's chamber doors burst open with no hands upon them. And there she stood. Not a ghost. Not a girl. Something between. Adise. Her body was formed of smoke and ember, but her eyes were the same. Silent, knowing, unafraid. The queen fell to her knees. Not out of respect. Out of the weight of her own doom. But Adise said nothing. She only walked forward. Her footsteps left trails of glowing soot. Her breath bent candlelight. And when she reached the throne room, the walls themselves sighed. For the ashes that breathe do not forget. And the throne she once watched from afar was no longer the queen's. It was hers. The palace had never seen a festival so grand. Silk banners fluttered from marble pillars, their crimson edges curling slightly under the dry, humming air. Guests from across the kingdoms had gathered for the queen's decade of rule, all adorned in golden jewelry and pressed robes. Music drifted through the open halls, and the scent of sweet wines, roasted meat, and scented oils laced the air. Yet beneath the ornate celebration, the palace held its breath. An old heaviness clung to the walls like forgotten cobwebs, trembling at something that refused to be silenced. The queen stood at the center of the throne room, her robe embroidered with flames, each stitch crafted to mimic fire licking up her arms. A crown of rubies rested on her head, the gems burning with a hue that echoed the real thing. She lifted her chalice, a smile perfectly practiced, and gave her speech with calculated grace, every word echoing power, stability, and everlasting rule. But those closest to her saw it, the flicker in her eyes, the way her fingers trembled around the goblet. As if she could feel something moving beneath the floor. Guards lined the polished walls, their faces unmoving but their eyes darting with unease. Whispers from the servants spoke of strange happenings, dishes shattered on their own, candles that flared without cause, footsteps in empty halls, and shadows that lingered a beat too long. One servant claimed she saw a trail of ash stretching from the queen's private chambers to the great hall. She was dismissed the next morning. Silenced. Suddenly, a gust of air howled through the throne room. The music faltered. A window pane shattered on the upper balcony, though no stone or arrow was seen. The chandeliers trembled. One fell, crashing against the floor near the queen's dais. The guests screamed, crowding together in a wave of silks and panic. The guards drew their blades, unsure whether to shield or flee. The queen raised her voice to calm them, but it was drowned by the sudden hiss, not of steel but of fire. Smoke rose from the floor, curling from cracks that hadn't been there moments before. Black and gray, twisting like serpents through the air, swallowing the gold shine of the hall. The smoke smelled not of wood nor oil but of something older. Like burned memory. Like scorched betrayal. The queen stepped back, her crown now askew. She barked orders, but her voice cracked with something rare, fear. The throne room darkened, even as torches still burned along the walls. The fire had come from beneath. The floorboards groaned. The marble tiles hissed. And then, flames. They erupted in a perfect ring around the queen's throne, then spiraled outward like vines on the hunt. People fled. Robes caught fire. Screams rang through the stone walls. The banners above ignited, turning red silk to embers in seconds. And then, in the thickest part of the smoke, A figure. She emerged slowly, as if rising not from the floor but from the fire itself. A woman cloaked in ash, her feet bare, her skin cracked and blackened like coal. But her eyes, they were alive. Glowing like the center of a furnace, twin flames where pupils should be. Her steps made no sound. But wherever she walked, the fire bowed. It moved with her, not against her. The queen froze. Her mouth moved without words. Her knees weakened beneath the weight of recognition. She knew. She remembered. Adise. Not the orphan girl she'd burned in secret. Not the threat she'd buried in darkness and silence. But the flame-bearer. The one born beneath a red moon. The one whose ash would not rest. The throne room moaned like a dying beast. Pillars cracked. Ceilings trembled. But all eyes were fixed on the figure in the smoke. Her veil trailed like a shroud of embers, leaving footprints of ash that never faded. She did not speak. But every breath she took sounded like a gust of wind through flame. The queen stumbled back, her guards abandoning their posts. Her voice returned in shrieks and denial. "You're dead. I burned you. You were gone." But the figure moved closer. And with her came a wind that blew through the chamber, not cold, not hot, but heavy with truth. Paintings peeled from walls. Tapestries burned to reveal older murals hidden beneath. Images of a girl cloaked in red, surrounded by flame, standing atop a throne scorched clean. The ground shook. Adise raised her hand, the skin blackened but the veins beneath it glowing like lava. The fire responded, swirling upward, dancing with intelligence. From the flames shapes emerged, symbols, names, faces. The queen gasped as her secrets played out in the fire's tongue. The hidden ritual. The locked dungeon. The cries she silenced. The pact she made with spirits long banished. She tried to run. Her robe caught fire. The throne itself cracked down the middle. The seat split, sending shards of gold and marble into the air. The queen fell to her knees, her crown rolling away into the firelight. Her screams melted into the roar of the blaze. Adise stopped before her. Silent. Watching. The queen lifted her eyes. She was weeping now, not just from fear but from the weight of everything catching up to her. Her power, her cruelty, her lies, all collapsing into ash. "Please," she whispered. I was only trying to stop the prophecy. I didn't know I thought it would end with you." The flames stilled. The chamber quieted. Adise knelt. She touched the queen's forehead. Her hand burned, but the queen didn't flinch. She sobbed as the fire curled around them like a serpent ready to strike. Then Adise whispered her first word since returning, "Remember." In that instant, the queen's mind was flooded with visions. The night of the burning. The fear in Adise's eyes. The cries echoing through the stone walls. The betrayal. The ancient prophecy. Her own mother's warnings. And then, her own soul standing in judgment. The queen collapsed. The fire rose like a wave, swallowing the dais. But Adise walked backward into it, the flames folding around her like a cloak. Her body turned to ash once more, but this time not with pain. The air shimmered where she vanished and the fire stopped. Silence returned to the throne room. The guests returned days later. The rubble was still warm. But in the center of the cracked floor where the throne once stood, was a single circle of soot, and within it, a flame that refused to die. No one rebuilt the throne. Instead, they left the ashes untouched. For generations, it was said that a soft wind would pass through that hall each year on the night of the Queen's festival. And in it, whispers. A girl's voice. And firelight that danced without source. The people remembered her. Not as a cursed orphan. Not as a shadow in the Queen's past. But as the one who returned, in ash, in flame, in truth. The fire didn't just burn, it breathed. As the nobles stumbled backward and the guards rushed to secure exits, the throne room groaned under the weight of something ancient. The marble beneath their feet cracked. Tapestries curled and shriveled. The golden emblems of the crown turned molten. But it was not destruction that arrived, it was revelation. Amid the flames, Adise stood. No longer the timid orphan, no longer the burned girl lost in the Queen's dungeons. She was reborn from ash and prophecy. Her eyes glowed like twin embers in a dark forest, burning with a fire not of pain but of purpose. Her skin shimmered with the fine dust of what once was flesh. The flames did not consume her. They carried her voice. The Queen tried to step forward, but her feet froze to the floor. Smoke curled around her arms like shackles. She opened her mouth to command her guards, but no sound came. Her voice, that sharp, proud thing, had fled. Adise turned to the nobles, her gaze sweeping across faces she once bowed to. Her voice crackled not from weakness but from the fire that carried it. "I did not die in silence," she said. "I did not vanish into smoke. I became it." The flames roared higher. The carvings above the throne caught fire, revealing ancient markings beneath the paint, sigils long buried by royal decree. The nobles gasped. They recognized the symbols. Forbidden. Royal. But not from the queen's line. "I was not the first child taken in by her kindness," Adiz continued, voice deepening with each word. "I was not the first whose truth she feared. But I am the last who will burn quietly." The queen struggled, but her gown had caught fire. Not flames that spread or blistered, but slow-burning streaks that danced like whispers. The nobles backed away from her. Even the guards hesitated. One of the counselors, Lord Kenga, stepped forward, eyes wide with both awe and terror. "Who are you?" he asked, voice trembling. Adiz's eyes fixed on him and her body pulsed with heat. "I am what she tried to bury. I am the flame she fed with lies. I am the child of prophecy born under the red moon. The ashes that remember." Another noble dropped to her knees, weeping. "The scrolls, they said the flame-bearer would come, when the crown's lies had piled too high to carry." Adiz nodded. The walls of the throne room began to shift. Paint peeled back, revealing murals hidden for generations. Murals of women, crowned, fierce, some veiled in red smoke, whose names had been erased. "She silenced them," Adiz said. "As she tried to silence me." The queen screamed, but still no sound came. Her lips moved, her hands flailed, but the fire had already decided her fate. The throne behind her cracked in two with a sound like thunder. The golden seat melted into slag, dripping like tears onto the floor. "I offer no revenge," Adiz said. "Only truth." The flames gathered into shapes, moments from the queen's past. Her midnight rituals. The secret corridor to the dungeon. The screams. The promises. The sacrifice. The nobles watched, silent. The guards stepped back. The truth could not be denied. One young soldier, barely past 20, stared at Adiz with wet eyes. "We didn't know," he whispered. "You were not meant to," she said. "Truth does not die. It waits." The queen collapsed. Her body smoldered, dress blackened, crown fallen. Her power had always come from control. And now, stripped of it, she looked smaller than any had ever seen her. Not a monarch, but a frightened woman surrounded by the echoes of her own deceit. Adiz stepped forward. The fire moved with her, parting like a curtain. She knelt beside the queen and placed a hand above her chest, not touching but near. A glow spread between them. "You offered me to the fire," Adiz said softly. "But the fire chose me instead." And then silence. Not the silence of fear but reverence. The flames receded. Smoke thinned. And in the center of the ruined throne room stood Adiz, alone, alive, reborn. No one moved. The queen did not rise again. And in that space, cleansed by fire, something old stirred. The truth of the kingdom. The legacy that had been hidden beneath layers of soot and secrets. Adiz turned once more to the people. "The flame does not forget," she said. "It waits. It watches. And when the time is right, it speaks." Outside, the sky darkened, not from storm, but from 1,000 crows that circled above the palace, as if in mourning or celebration. In the streets, whispers began to rise like smoke. In the ruins of the throne, something new prepared to rise. The fire had spoken. And the kingdom would never be the same again. The queen ran. Or tried to. Her golden slippers slipped against the soot-streaked tiles as she stumbled through the burning halls of her palace. Smoke clouded her vision. Curtains once embroidered with her lineage now hissed with flames. The walls whispered. Not with wind but with voices. Old voices. Forgotten voices. The voices of those who had waited in silence. She turned toward the eastern corridor. Flames roared to block her path. She turned toward the servants' wing. Fire already licked the arches. Every door she opened exhaled heat. Every hallway she entered glowed with red vengeance. "No," she gasped, pulling at her heavy dress. "This was not how it ends. I am the chosen. I made sacrifices for this crown." Her words fell flat against the air. No magic came. No guard answered. The palace, once obedient to her command, now echoed only judgment. In the throne room they still watched. Nobles and guards alike stood stunned. No one moved to help her. No one dared. The fire was not wild, it was wise. It did not consume everything. It moved with memory, curling around portraits, creeping across tapestries to reveal what had been hidden. It unveiled secret doors. Scratched out names. blood-written sigils beneath tiles. The queen reached the garden door, locked. Heat surged through the iron. She screamed, recoiling, her palms seared. Behind her, footsteps. But not human. She turned and saw them. Figures walking through the fire, untouched by it. Some cloaked in black ash. Others glowing faintly like coals. All with hollow eyes and soot-marked skin. Spirits of the palace. Servants, children, oracles. Forgotten souls who had vanished during her reign. Buried in secret. Mourned in silence. They were not here to haunt. They were here to judge. One stepped forward, a boy no older than 10, eyes glowing softly like embers in dusk. "Do you remember my name?" he asked. She backed away. "I gave you shelter," she spat. "You were nothing before I brought you here." He tilted his head. "You took our names. You took our tongues. You took our fire, but it remembers." Another spirit appeared, a woman once known for healing. Her arms bore marks of chains long since turned to dust. "You burned my records," she said. "But the roots still know my name." And they whispered it to the flames. The queen turned again, running now, breath short, eyes wild. Down the west hall, where a door to the cellar lay hidden. She shoved it open and descended, dress trailing smoke. In the dark, she gasped for air. But even here, fire flickered, small blue flames dancing along the walls like eyes blinking. The air grew thick. Not from smoke. From presence. Adi's voice rang out, not from above but within the stone itself. "You never ruled," it said. "You reigned. You controlled. You silenced." The queen sank to her knees, trembling. "They chose me," she cried. "I was born to lead." The walls groaned. "No," the fire whispered. "You were born to burn." Suddenly the spirits appeared once more. But now they circled her, not touching, only watching. One by one they spoke. "You lied to keep power. You silenced every truth that did not worship your crown. You turned fire into fear. You buried us and called it peace." The queen wept. Her crown fell with a clatter, rolling across the stone floor, catching against the ankle of a spirit child whose eyes gleamed with moonlight. He kicked it away. In the city below, the people gathered outside the palace. They had seen the sky turn red. They had heard the rumble. And now they watched smoke pour from the tower. Yet no one panicked. They did not run. They waited. One elder, eyes clouded with age but sharp with memory, spoke to the gathered crowd. "This is not destruction. This is cleansing." A girl in the crowd whispered to her mother, "Is it true the queen burned a girl?" The mother knelt. "She burned many," she said. "But fire does not forget. And neither do the ashes." Inside, the queen crawled back toward the throne room, her last hope of safety. But the throne was no longer there. Only molten gold and smoldering stone remained. Adiz appeared once more. Not as spirit. Not as flame. As form, walking, breathing, her feet stirring the dust of old reigns. The nobles bowed. Even the guards lowered their heads. "You wore power like a mask," Adiz said, standing over the queen. "But now your face is bare." The queen looked up, eyes wet with smoke and terror. "What will you do to me?" Adiz crouched. "It is not my judgment you face." She stepped aside. The spirits moved forward. But they did not attack. They did not scream. They sang. A low, deep song. Words from a tongue older than the kingdom. A song of reckoning. Of memory. Of names once erased now spoken again. The queen's body trembled. Shadows rose around her like vines, wrapping but not strangling. Smoke circled her head like a broken crown. She tried to scream, but her voice cracked like old parchment. Then she was gone. Not in flame. In silence. The fire dimmed. The spirits faded, not gone but at peace. Adiz turned to the people gathered beyond the palace gates. The massive doors creaked open. Smoke spilled out, curling around their feet like greeting hands. She walked out, barefoot, crowned in ash. The people fell silent. One elder stepped forward. "Who speaks for the fire now?" Adiz raised her hand. "I speak with it. I do not command it." Another villager asked, "Will there be another queen?" Adiz looked back at the scorched palace. "There will be truth. And if truth sits upon a throne, let it be heavy." The people bowed. The flames behind her settled. The palace would remain, not as a monument to power, but as a memory of what happens when truth is buried and fire is ignored. And from that day on, whenever the wind carried the scent of smoke, the people would pause. Not in fear but in reverence. For they knew the fire still remembered. And the fire had judged. Whispers spread like wildfire even after the flames had cooled. From the charred ruins of the once glorious palace, the people emerged not just shaken but awakened. The throne was gone, melted into twisted gold and stone. The queen, once untouchable, once adored, had fled into the fire and been claimed by it. But what lingered was not terror or confusion. What remained was something stranger, heavier, older than any had known, the ashes. And within them a name. Adise. Her name echoed through the markets, across the broken corridors, and in the ears of the very servants who had once watched her carry water in silence. She had been a ghost in life, silent, obedient, unknown. But in death she burned brighter than the sun. Children began to draw her symbol in the dirt, 3 flames crossing at the base of a tree. Elders whispered that the palace fire had not destroyed the kingdom but purified it. And deep in the ashes of the throne room, something had taken shape. A small figure emerged one dawn from the ruins. The people, having gathered instinctively near the remains, fell silent as the wind swept through the blackened air. In the center where Adi's ashes had last danced, a child stood barefoot, soot-covered but untouched by pain. Around her, glowing embers curved in a circle as if shielding her. Her eyes burned, not with fire but with clarity. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. It was an elder from the outer villages, a bent woman named Ayabo, who first recognized the signs. She approached the child, falling to her knees without hesitation. "The flame speaks again," she murmured, and those around her followed. Murmurs turned into chants. The name Adise was spoken with reverence, as though invoking a goddess. Investigations unearthed an old truth buried by centuries of silence. A scroll found in a hidden wall behind the queen's private chamber revealed what many suspected but none dared confirm. Adise was not merely a girl born under a red moon. She was the last descendant of Queen Adama, a ruler long erased from palace history for defying the old kings. Adama had ruled with a vision that frightened the throne, a vision of shared power, of a kingdom ruled by voice, not by fear. Her bloodline had been hunted, her name wiped from stone, her legacy reduced to bedtime myths. But blood remembers. And ashes, it seemed, could whisper louder than shouts. The child in the ruins, barely 6 winters old, was named Mara. A servant girl whispered that Adise had once cradled her in secret, singing to her when no one was watching. She had hidden the child beneath old floorboards the night the queen summoned her for the ritual. A prophecy unfulfilled cannot be killed, Adise had believed. And she was right. Mara was not just a child of Adise. She was a symbol of the flame's rebirth. Her very existence proved that the fire had not destroyed, it had delivered. Without a ruler, and with the royal bloodline exposed as treacherous, the elders held a gathering under the burned sky. For the first time in generations, no golden chair stood at the center. Instead, they circled around the fire pit where the throne had once stood. It was here the decision was made. Not with swords, not with declarations, but with memory. They recalled Adi's silence. Her eyes that watched everything. Her refusal to speak lies even when it meant punishment. They remembered the flame's refusal to consume her until she had spoken her truth. They remembered the night the throne melted, not by revolt, but by justice given form in fire. It was agreed. The next leader would not wear gold or ride chariots. She would not command with fear or perform illusions of power. She would be chosen by the signs, and the signs all pointed to Mara. The coronation was unlike any in history. No music, no parades, no roaring crowds. Just a quiet gathering as the village elders brought Mara to the temple of old queens. It had not been used in years, left to rot as male rulers built new palaces. But now the vines had parted, the doors had swung open as if pulled by invisible hands. Inside, the ashes of Adise were placed in a sacred bowl. The moment Mara stepped into the chamber, the bowl shimmered. A gust of warm wind circled the room, stirring the embers into flame, brief, golden, soft. A flame not meant to burn but to bless. Mara touched the bowl, and from the smoke emerged a crown. Not of jewels or forged gold, but of woven branches and flame-colored stones. The elders placed it on her head. She did not flinch. She looked forward, steady and silent. From that day the people no longer called her by her given name. She was the flame's heir. A child of prophecy, but more importantly, a child of truth. The palace was never rebuilt in stone. Instead, a new council hall was constructed in the center of the kingdom, open to the sky, shaped like a circle, so no one stood above the rest. Mara would sit among her people, not before them. Decisions were made by voices, not orders. But her presence alone carried weight. The stories said her eyes glowed in the moonlight, that her footsteps left warmth in the soil, that when she sang, which was rare, Flowers bloomed even from scorched earth. The queen who once ruled was never found. Some said she burned to ash that night, swallowed by the truth. Others believed she wandered the cursed woods, tormented by the spirit of fire she could not control. But no statue was ever raised for her. No grave was marked. She became a warning, not a memory. As the seasons passed, children grew up hearing the story of the girl who was silent but carried a flame in her soul. Schools taught of the red moon and the courage to endure injustice. Festivals were held not to praise royalty, but to honor the power of truth emerging from silence. And each year, on the night of the fire's anniversary, Mara would light a single torch at the center of the council. No speeches. No pageantry. Just one flame. A reminder that justice, no matter how deeply buried, will always rise through ash. That truth, though silenced, will always find breath again. And that a kingdom born in fear will fall, but a kingdom born in flame, of justice and memory will never be forgotten.